Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, January the 20th in the Memorial Arena. I'd like to begin by thanking the Shaw staff and our volunteer crew that makes the show possible. Walter, it's been another crazy week in the world. Yeah, the first segment of Citizens Forum is always Walter and Jack show. And Walter, you have something you just showed me, a very interesting piece of news.
Well, it's nice to bring in some good news or something positive happening on occasion. And what's happened is that there's a member of parliament that is bringing forward a private member's bill asking for better warnings on cell phone packages. Basically, the press release is here, but I don't think we need to read it. Basically, the issue is this is the same member of parliament. His name is Terrence Young, and he brought forward a private member's bill on better warnings on prescription drugs last year. So basically, they're asking in the legislation to take the warnings that are inside the package in the little booklets and things, with the same wording, and to place it on the exterior of their package in a more prominent fashion, so people will know that this is a microwave emitting device and it could be harmful. Now, this is including other wireless devices like routers and baby monitors and other microwave emitting devices.
So cell phones, baby monitors, routers, etc.
Yeah, any wireless devices all emit electromagnetic radiation.
Okay, there's millions of them everywhere.
That's right.
So, and he's saying he wants to, and this is a Conservative member of Parliament.
That's correct.
He wants to take the warning that is in the very, very fine print inside the package that nobody will ever read, and put that on the outside of the box.
Yeah, for the most part.
Like on a package of tobacco.
It's just like a package of tobacco. Now, the electromagnetic radiation that's emitted from these types of devices has been categorized by the World Health Organization in the same category as DDT, lead, and car exhaust. So, like, this is not
So
this is a very, very important thing.
Or probable carcinogens.
That's correct.
So microwave radiation that's coming out of your cell phone is a probable
Carcinogen.
And the warning that these, I won't say anything, show us, they don't have to show us, because our government says, yeah, you can just put it inside in the fine print where nobody's going to read it.
Well, it covers them in legal issues. That they say, well, we warned you in our packaging that this device, has to be held 1 inch from your head if it's a cell phone, and all sorts of other warnings. So basically, they're just calling for that step to be taken, and it would look a lot like warnings on cigarette packages.
So what is the warning actually going to say?
Well, we don't know yet. They haven't given the exact wording to that. But
well, this is one of your main interests is wireless technology and the health impacts of it. So what are the health impacts of a cell phone for somebody who's using it a lot? Are there no health impacts?
Well, it all depends who you're asking, of course, Jack. If you're asking industry-funded scientists, there doesn't seem to be a lot of problem. And if you ask independent scientists, you find a lot of problems. Now, I rely more heavily on independent scientists and also upon the International Cancer Research Agency that works for the World Health, or is affiliated with the World Health Organization. These are the people that set these guidelines for all sorts of exposures to all sorts of chemicals and other agents that could be harmful. So this is the agency that really sets a tone for what happens worldwide. They are very, very conservative. Many people that were sitting on the committee that were asking for a higher designation for this type of radiation.
You mean a higher risk?
Well, they wanted to designate this type of radiation as a Class 1 carcinogen. So even in that committee, there's many people that wanted a higher rating, and it's moving in that direction. When an agent gets onto this list, like dioxins and DDT and such, it never gets off the list. They don't get up in the morning and say, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as we thought. Usually it climbs up into a higher category as time goes by. So this is a very, very serious issue, and the good science is showing that there are real and profound biological harm for everyone, especially for children. Especially for children, for instance, that are in a Wi-Fi environment at school. Children's immune systems are not developed like adults. The radiation penetrates their body more deeply, especially in their brain. It causes a whole range of ill health effects, including associated with things like autism and all sorts of other more profound effects. So it's something very, very important that the public should know, and these warnings should be on the exterior of these packages, in my opinion.
Yeah, so what's the Member of Parliament's name again?
His name is Terrence Young. We're going to post the website that people should go to and read this press release and many other things. By the way, the Canadians for Safe Technology is headed by a fellow who used to be the president of Microsoft Canada. So very, very prominent person. And
so the former head of Microsoft Canada is campaigning against
the technology that he used to sell, basically. So very, very important that this group has really made great strides and have remained very, very science-based and willing to work with all political parties.
Now, the only problem is, of course, and it comes down to that same problem that we have to talk about every week because it never changes, which is this doesn't matter. Because the media won't report it, so Canadians won't know it. And I mean, this already happened yesterday, so I mean, I certainly didn't see or hear anything in the media today about this, except when you showed it to me.
Yeah.
And the politicians won't do anything. And it's because both the media and the politicians are owned by the same people who own the corporations and the banks and everything else that are behind all of this. So they'll happily give you all kinds of cancer-causing stuff. They don't care as long as they're making money doing it. And in fact, I don't expect to hear it on CFAX because CFAX is owned by the same company that owns Bell Media. So, I mean, or Bell Mobility. So they're in the business. And they also own the CTV network. So are we ever going to see any truth about any issue anywhere? And I don't want to pick on CFAX and CTV because they're all the same. They're all the same, and I'm so tired of saying it, and nothing changes.
Well, it does, Jack. I mean, there is change, and slowly but surely there's change. And the more pressure we bring onto the politicians, the people that are supposed to be representing us, to create legislation, the more people that become aware, and the more letters that are written and all that, eventually does create change. Now, we are up against the big boys here. We're up against the largest corporations in the world. So you have to come to expect that they're going to throw a lot of roadblocks in front of anything that's progressive. But eventually, if enough people in this country want to have labeling on cell phone packages or on baby monitors, we'll have them. It's just going to take a little bit of work.
Yeah, unfortunately, these guys may have destroyed the planet, and who knows how many people are going to be dying because they fight this fierce battle over and over and over again. And it's always about money, and their profit. And they always pretend it's about whatever they want to pretend it's about. They control the politicians. It's just, it's getting worse. I mean, we seem to be on the brink of war here. I feel like I'm sitting somewhere prior to the beginning of World War I or World War II, and I just get the feeling that the people who run this country are trying to bring us into a state of war on terror, except it's a war of terror, and we are the terrorists.
Yeah.
And I'll just say again, if you Google Hitler, Bush, and Guardian, the British newspaper The Guardian, Bush, Hitler, and Guardian, you'll see the story about how Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of the two presidents Bush, was director of a bank that was controlled by some of the most powerful and wealthiest families in the United States, and they were funneling money to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis at the beginning because they saw Hitler as an up-and-comer who could give them what they wanted, which was, control of Germany. So they were funding Hitler and the Nazis, the money coming out of America, out of Canada, probably, and we don't even know about it. And we live in a moment in time when exactly the same thing seems to be happening, because a lot of people are writing everywhere, except we never see it in our corporate media, that the United States and their allies are behind ISIS, and the United States and their allies were behind Al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden worked for the CIA. I mean, these are all facts. And yet, I shouldn't say they're facts. A lot of people who seem to have a lot of knowledge are writing about and talking about these things. And yet, we live in a world in which the media pretends these things don't even exist. And they're just destroying us. And we've got to stop.
Well, the war it's an information war. We are in a war for sure. And whatever you think we know about any particular issue, and we got a couple more we're going to talk about today, we're relying on the sources are well-known liars. But that's the mainstream. But that's the mainstream take on incidents like the Paris shootings. We have this sort of mainstream view of what happened there, but we're seemingly not allowed to research and to put together, the facts of the case and to examine it carefully. Very hard to pick up the nuances of what happened in some of these situations, and it's a lot of work. But nevertheless, if you do, you can draw very different conclusions than what the mainstream media is telling you. So we have to just be better at it. All citizens should be just better at sifting the wheat from the chaff, and just come to your own conclusions. Don't trust the mainstream corporate view of things. That's all that's very important. We may not agree on things, but that's okay. But we should be allowed to do that. And whenever you do any sort of analysis, and people immediately start to call you a conspiracy theorist, you go like, wow, am I a conspiracy theorist? I'm just trying to find the truth. The official story is pretty flimsy, got a lot of holes in it. Obviously, we should examine that, and we shouldn't. If people call us conspiracy theorists, and then they are living in fear themselves of living in fear of the truth.
And one big part of the problem is that we just don't have the ability to put out the message that it's so important for the public to get. Maybe the message isn't right, but when all the message on every television station in the country, virtually every radio station in the country, every newspaper in the country, plus they control the books and they control the movies and they control a lot of the music. When one small group of seeming lunatics control all of that in an entire nation, and we seem to be on the verge of war with international terrorists and the entire Muslim world and Russia. But if you look at the facts of what's actually happening, there's a completely different story out there. So remember, it's very possible that everything we've been told about World War II, if you know that corporate America was funding Hitler and the Nazis to bring them to power, then everything has to be in question. And we've got to be asking those questions. We've got to build our democracy, because these same people have taken it away from us completely. It doesn't matter what we think. And we've got to build a media, because a media is important for a democracy. All of these things. And you know what? We've got to build the organization that can start to make it happen. And we're not even there.
And we have to ask tough questions to our politicians. I phoned Saanich City Hall today looking at some issues around the Richard Atwell story and all that. Never got much out of anybody. But the thing is that they have to be pressed into, telling us what the heck is going on. Like the story about what's happened around with the spyware and all that is pretty flimsy. It's pretty strange. Anybody with any common sense would look at that and go, really? Is that the official line? Obviously, there's stuff going on in the background, but the administration and the other councillors seem to have closed ranks on that.
Yeah, I'll just say I think there are some big, big problems in Saanich City Council and some big, big problems with the leadership of the Saanich Police Force. I mean, and those, now we know there are some big problems. This can't be covered up. This can't be closed over. I mean, I think we need for some truth to come out, because this city was almost put into spending $1 billion on sewage treatment for something to protect the environment, with a plan that was going to do nothing for the environment, virtually no benefit whatsoever, at a cost of $1 billion. And Saanich was a big part of this, and there are many, many other issues. We've got to find out what's going on.
And in that issue, the sewage treatment plant, the proponents for this type of treatment had no science behind them. There was no real good scientific reports saying that they should go ahead with this type of treatment. So,
and our city councilors don't
it was all
even
public
care.
relations and spin.
Yeah.
You know, David Anderson has been interviewed this week on Voice of BC, and he makes some very good points, like, hey, let's just get the science, let's get the reports in real science, and give us a chance to make a decision. But we've never had that chance. So anyway, that's a good news story, Jack. I think somebody trying to put labels on cell phone packages and routers and stuff is a very good idea. I just want to bring something else up, if that's okay. Because you know, you were talking to Chris Cook last week on the show, and we're talking about the electromagnetic warfare that the war games that are being undertaken in Washington State, northern Washington State, and we have official reports from the U.S. military. It's a very, very reliable source the U.S. military is saying what they're up to. And there's no other analysis. You know, there's no other real mainstream analysis other than what the military is telling you.
So, and this is, you said, electromagnetic
radiation warfare.
warfare.
They're exercises, and what they're talking about is generating a whole lot of radiation from radar and things like that, and then trying to jam those signals and such, and it all might be quite plausible. But there's other things that the military is doing with electromagnetic radiation, and it's very, very important to know that there are patents that are now been issued that are operable and been shown to be operable, that can modify weather. Now, this sounds wild, but in fact it does exist. The patents have been issued. They have shown that they can alter weather patterns by firing very powerful electromagnetic beams up into the ionosphere. And basically, you're not only be able to alter weather, you could create weather. You could do things like, if you have a hurricane, you can make it a lot bigger. You know, if you have other types of weather events, even perhaps earthquakes can be made worsened by this type of technology. Now, it all sounds pretty wild. Well, this is where the public has to do a little bit of reading. Now, there's a great book that was written 10 years ago or more called Angels Don't Play This HAARP. HAARP stands for High Altitude Auroral Research Project, and it's a big array of transmitters up in Alaska. That's what they do. One of the things they do is they fire these electromagnetic beams up into the ionosphere, creating very, very intense areas of energy, like in billions of watts within like a square meter, and they just want to see what happens. It's a very, very wild thing that they can do. Now, the exercises in Washington State could be related to this HAARP weapon. We don't know, because we don't have anything but the official story, and that's why people should be looking into it more carefully, and we should be opposing this type of activity. By the way, it's very, very dangerous for all beings, not just humans, and it's very, very serious for those that are up close to this type of weaponry.
Yeah, I mean, at this time in human history, when so many things are hanging in the balance, do we really need war games for like the next generation of warfare?
Yeah,
It's just crazy. Somehow we've got to, you know, the American people are at the heart of this. I think the American people are very good. They've been put through hell by the people who run their country, but you know, America is a great country with great people, and somehow, I don't know how they're going to do it. They've got to retake their nation.
well, they have to get control over their military. A country that doesn't have control over its military is going to fail. Sooner or later, that military is going to make some big enough mistakes to really cause some really horrific.
Well, they've already done. It's
Results.
not the military; it's whoever the leadership is.
Yeah,
and to me, the leadership of both the United States and Canada is totally corporate.
Yeah.
I mean, the elections are a farce. I mean, they don't care how we vote, and they don't care who we elect, because really, I think there's a group of people in this country who control our governments.
Well, I think they do. They are concerned about who does get elected. They don't mind if it's whoever gets elected is part of the agenda. That's wonderful. But there are politicians that are honest, that do want to make things change, and positive change, like bringing proportional representation to this country. There are good things that can happen politically. But the way the drift is right now, the Stephen Harper drift, is away from democracy, and it is towards corporate control. So we have to know that very, very centralized sort of model that the Conservative Party of Canada uses, starting with Stephen Harper, is very, very dangerous for democracy. So but just generally, I think we can still make change with our legal and with our parliaments, but we just have to work hard at it. It's very hard when we have such big opponents.
Yeah. Walter, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, January the 20th in Victoria, BC. I'd like to thank again the Shaw staff and our volunteer crew that makes it all happen. Our guest in this segment is Beau Filter. Welcome, Beau.
Thank you, Jack.
Beau's the author of The Cause of Wars and Aggression. I just want to read a review of it. This is by Dr. Leo Sandy, who's Professor of Peace and Justice Studies at Plymouth State University. I'm very impressed. The writing is clear, forceful, reasoned, and thoughtful. You appear to grasp the fundamental truths of war and aggression in an interesting and unique way. And Beau, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll start off with question number 1. What are we to make of all these recent terror events, and what is going on?
Well, on the surface, we get the corporate media version, which is a privatized, unconstitutional version of reality. When I say unconstitutional, we are guaranteed a freedom of the press. And that would require many perspectives from all over the political spectrum. But instead, we have a unitary perspective, which has been drummed down our throat for the last 60 years, since World War II at least, and it's very simple for the public to swallow. Evil East, angelic West. No matter how it's portrayed, the story always comes out, and therefore the end is we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, we have the right, God-given right to go get them. And they can put it out in endless forms because they control this corporate media, which is not the public media. Now, the first person can say, well, we got PBS and we got the CBC, wait a minute, those are public. But they've been taken over as well, and you'll see them putting out documentaries and all kinds of specials that are right in lockstep with the corporate unitary perspective, Evil East, angelic West. So once we understand that, then we can start to look at all these events and know that there's something common under all of them, and it is that they are fabricated by the West. The CIA, a lot of people don't know, was given life in 1947, right after World War II. And its job was to get only intelligence on other countries. But right off the bat, it started doing illegal activities. And ever since then, there's been all kinds of operations going on that are illegal, that are funded by the government, and then some of them are funded with what's called the black budget, which is over $1 trillion a year that nobody can find out anything about. So one of the first things they did was Operation Gladio. And what it did is it started to go into every country where the people were starting to form governments after World War II and attack them, sabotage them, claim it was the communists or some other group, just to terrify and terrorize these countries. One of the big events was the Bologna, Italy bombing that killed almost 300 people back in the late 40s, early 50s. And so these kinds of black terrorist operations began right from the very beginning. So now we see that Gladio is when there's shootings being done, like all these events now. These events are anytime someone is doing something outside what the U.S. corporate and elitist agenda is, they get punished, they get whipped right away. So this thing in France now, when there's a killing, you'll see it's polished up front, but then there's some hapless, bumbling idiot that gets blamed for it. And you'll see that like what happened in Ottawa. Everywhere you go, it's always the same common thread. There's a CIA operation in. And the actual real dirty work is done by the assets, the CIA assets in Operation Gladio. So today, so Gladio also, when we go to Ukraine, the recent coup in February in Ukraine, the actual shooters on the rooftops, we now have found out recently, were Gladio experts that do the shooting and the bombing, and then they bring in all the puppetware.
I was just listening today on CFAX radio. They had a guest on, and they were talking about the overthrow of the former prime minister, and that was exactly it. They said he had to go when his police or military started shooting down protesters in the big square in the city. But they blamed it on the government of that time. But I mean, there's a lot of people saying and a lot of evidence that in fact the shooters were from the outside, and they, if anything, were working for the people who are now the government. And that's standard procedure now. They bring in the snipers, they start to shoot people on both sides and just create a fury for whoever they want. And yet that's never mentioned. That whole aspect of things is just hidden, and Russia's the bad guy, Russia's the bad guy, Russia's the bad guy. Mm-hmm. It's not true. I mean, Russia may be a bad guy, but we have no idea of the actual facts of what happened in Ukraine, or what happened in Paris, or what happened in the attack on our parliament a few months ago, because they won't tell us, and we've got to find out.
Well, these, in the alternative press, you can find this out, but the problem is you have to read, and the public prefers to get its so-called news from an easy source. And television, as Roger Ailes of Fox News back in the Nixon years already said, the people don't read, they don't go to other sources. They let us do the thinking for them because they're lazy. That's what Roger Ailes said. So it makes it very easy for the public to parrot what that privatized media is saying because they don't have to do the work of going and reading. But if you do, there's all kinds of sources out there now.
Well, I think one reason people don't do the reading is because a lot of people, as I did myself in the past, people trust the media. And I think one of the most important things that has to be done to save ourselves is to break that trust. And just more and more people have to come to the sad realization that our media doesn't work for us and absolutely can't be trusted and probably is one of our worst enemies.
That's correct, because, the word trust is not bad in and of itself, but blind trust is much more dangerous, because if you accept without critical analysis, and remember, our schools do not teach us how to think, and that's the one thing education should do. If anything else, every high school graduate should come out of there and know how to think so he has the tools to get on in the world in a good way. But we don't. We teach people to parrot and to do rote thinking stuff, because the training is really to work in corporate settings. It's not to work in,
Yeah.
so
To work in a
questioning.
factory or to work in a job and do as you're told. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I came out of school, the idea of that kind of independent thinking never even entered my mind.
That's right. And you're not, they don't tell you that it should be an issue to become a mature,
Citizen.
honest citizen that can ply his way into life in a successful way. You've got to know how to weigh the facts, weigh information, what's true, what isn't true. But if you're not given the tools for that, you just kind of say, wow. And then, of course, from childhood, we're taught authority, obey authority, whether it's your school teacher, your parents, the minister, or the government. And so the media appears like it's really, here's the news. And so they can spin this by always, there's an old ad in the 1920s, the ad man, always tell the truth, semicolon, never tell the whole truth.
Yeah.
You see, so you sucker people in. The confidence man comes in, and here's the truth. Yes, there was an explosion and a bombing here. Then what happened after that is you don't give them the whole truth. You don't say who the real actors is. You leave that part out. Never give them the whole truth, because then if they're informed, they can challenge the powers that be, and that's not what they want to happen. So if we go back to Maidan Square for a minute in Ukraine, we do now know that the shooters were Gladio shooters. They were part of the Nazi government that's in power in Ukraine now. And they've blamed this whole thing on Russia. That's the unitary perspective. Angelic West, nothing, all evil onto Russia. They've taken over the government, and they're beating these people up and everything. And yet, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, his son is now on the board of the largest private oil company over there. Well, why would Russia, if they are invading, want to give all the oil to the U.S. Vice President's
That's
son?
right. Is it the son of the Vice President of the United States recently
Joe
became a high-level executive in a big Ukrainian-based...
Right.
Well, yeah.
And another example, I should read this because it's kind of a mouthful of another appointee by Poroshenko, who is a acclaimed Nazi, because he just appointed, I think it was October 14th, a national celebration day for Stefan Bandera, who was the Nazi, the star Nazi in Ukraine during World War II. So they're picking up and going after Russia just right off that, being pushed by the U.S. I mean, it's an incredible story. It's as if World War II never got completely over. The people that supported Hitler all through the war just kept pushing, no, let's get Russia. Let's get Russia. They're on their knees. Don't go away now, And so now they've got a new brand of Nazis in the government there. So Poroshenko, here's one of the things he did to show that it's not Russia invading, it's the U.S. invading. A U.S.-installed Nazi dictator, billionaire, oligarch, Petro Poroshenko, unconstitutionally decrees the U.S. investment banker and U.S. State Department official Natalia A. Jaresko as a citizen of Ukraine and as the head of Ukraine's financial minister. Well, now, if the U.S. has, come in and pilfered Ukraine, why is the U.S. State Department now in charge, an international banker in charge of all of the money in Ukraine? You see, it just shows how wacko it is. But the media will not show you that. They won't tell you that. Now, one of the big dangers we have now is there are a lot of people in the U.S. government, because they're running the sanctions against Russia, is all forced on them because they supposedly invaded and they supposedly shot down MH17. Now, we finally have traced what happened to the bodies of the pilots of that plane. okay? On the ground, witnesses said they were riveted with bullet holes. That means, and they keep referring to 30 millimeter. This would come from a cannon on a fighter jet out of from the government of Kiev, which means the U.S. is responsible for it. But to keep these sanctions alive, the public can't know this. So they've got the bodies now in the Netherlands, and the autopsy report, they promised they would give to the world right away. They won't release it because the bodies are riveted with bullet holes instead of a supposed shrapnel pieces from a missile that was fired by the Russian separatists up into the air and blowing the plane.
Now I have no idea of what has happened in Ukraine and in most of the other situations that go on around the world. But I do know that I absolutely will not trust the story that I'm told by our media. All those talking heads on CTV and CBC feeding fear amongst us and anger and hatred towards others. I'm so sick and tired of it. I really believe that our corporate media is trying to lead us into a war. And I don't know why. I don't know how that can benefit them. And I mean the people who run this country. I don't know how it can benefit them, but one after another we see over my whole life, and war. And the last, the attack on Iraq, completely, what was that except a war of terror? Well over a million completely innocent Iraqi people dead. The bombing of Libya, the attack on Syria that we've done. It's not, these are being funded by external forces, and these wars created, and our media gives us a completely phony story, and it goes on, and the real question is, how can we change it, or can we change it?
Well, it can be changed, but the will of the people has to really be challenged here, because like we were talking earlier about the trusting authority, it's so easy, it's so convenient to trust authority and just let things go. Because let's look at us in North America. Boy, you can get in your car and drive anywhere. You can have a nice house to live in. Everything looks fine. But if we looked at the world according to a war map, it's like a hurricane. The whole world is war-ridden. And the eye of the cyclone is North America, because this is where the wars are starting from. So this is where it can change. Now, one of the first things we have to do is, now there's talk that, well, the people behind these wars are not the healthiest people in the world. These are what people normally think of as as psychopaths. I call them people that suffer from the criminal aggressor personality disorder. But they have in common an insatiable thirst for power. And now on what they see they can do, and it's all written in their documents like PNAC, Project for a New American Century, we're taking over the world, every square inch. I saw it in the top secret war room when I worked in it in the 60s. But taking over the world is an idea that they just can't let go of. And sharing power around the world is something they don't want to do. So every country that gets out of line, and wherever there's attack, where countries try to break loose, they punish them, like this terrorist attack now in France. What did France do? France said, we should ease the sanctions against Russia because there's no evidence that blah, 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 that they were committing any crimes. And so the U.S., in comes the CIA, the operatives come in, it's a smooth operation, and some hapless buggers get hooked for it, get framed for it. And this framing process goes on country after country after country. Look at the leaders, as you were mentioning earlier, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. Each one, every time a country is knocked out, it's because they're demonized, and then you have to get the fever of the public to go along with it and stampede. So like, for example, this whole thing about ISIS now and trying to get at Assad in Syria. So we have ISIS and ISIL and all this now. And so The public doesn't want to have anything to do with this war. So what do? Well, we're going to get their interest. So what do? We whack off a couple heads. Knock off a couple heads, and the public is absolutely, okay, we got to get them. But they don't realize that the U.S. is just using this. All these groups, they parent back to the original Mujahideen, which was used by the U.S. to sucker Russia into invading Afghanistan back in the late 70s.
Yeah. And Russia, I don't think, invaded Afghanistan. Russia was called in by the Afghan government.
That's technically
the
correct.
U.S. financed basically a group of fanatics,
That's
fundamental
yes.
religious fanatics, or I shouldn't even say that. They just paid people to go in and fight a war.
Yes.
They paid them.
That's right,
And
mercenaries.
people need work, and people are always willing to fight. So they funded the war in Afghanistan.
Right.
Russia was brought into it to defend their ally, which was Afghanistan. I understand, was a relatively prosperous for a poor nation country. They had a secular government, non-religious, women, children, people had full rights. It wasn't a bad place. The U.S. went in and over a period of a decade totally destroyed it.
Yes, and they also took over the drug trade, the poppy, made sure that it flourished. The Taliban pushed it out temporarily, but that was also inbred from the U.S. These are all CIA inventions.
Well, what was
Used to-
9/11 if not? I mean, in my opinion, 9/11 was also a false flag attack.
Well, it's all hinges on that. You know, this war on terrorism is actually, you can't have a war on a verb, on a process, a terrorizing event. You can have a war of terrorism
Yes.
where you're going around and terrorizing the world, and that's really what it is. I think you mentioned something about that on your earlier segment. But the U.S.'s war of terrorism is a way to get all these countries to fall into the
So we've missed out on all
basket.
the other questions. Let's just run through them because these are things you wanted to talk about. Is the U.S. crazy enough to start a nuclear war?
Well, okay, let's look at the history a little bit on that. Number one, they invented the first atomic bombs and they used them, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was a book written to win a nuclear war, and ever since they had them, the U.S. government has threatened almost every little pipsqueak country with a nuclear threat if they don't become a vassal of the U.S. interests. And then we have depleted uranium. And depleted uranium, the United States has shot that off. This is a serious weapon of mass destruction all over Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, Iraq. In fact, there's a picture here I want your viewers to see, and I want to quote from a grandfather of the picture that your viewers are going to look at. And his name is Juma Khan of Lagman Province, Afghanistan. And this was in March of 2003. Here's what he says. After the Americans destroyed our village and killed many of us, we also lost our houses and have nothing to eat. However, we would have endured these miseries and even accepted them if the Americans had not sentenced us all to death. When I saw my deformed grandson, I realized that my hopes of the future have vanished for good. I know we are part of the genocide brought on us by America, a silent death from which I know we will not escape. So when we ask the question, would the U.S. do it? If they would poison lands forever to make deformed, there's hundreds, thousands of these being born now in these areas because you can't clean up depleted uranium. I actually have in possession the documents of the U.S. government making the decision in the late 1940s to make depleted uranium as a weapon. And they first used it experimentally in the Yom Kippur War of 1973. They had the Israelis use it. And boy, is it effective, because you shoot a depleted uranium bullet into a tank and it blows it up like a tin can. But it sprays depleted uranium all over the landscape. It becomes aerosol and it goes up and can get into the jet stream. It's a hideous invention. It's a weapon of mass destruction, and yet the United States goes around in their militarized media claiming all these other countries have weapons of mass destruction. We got to get them, when they're the actual purveyors and users of them. So right now, there is talk that the U.S. Wants a nuclear war. Some people. Now, we have to remember, there are sober people in the U.S. government too. But there's the crazies, like George H.W. Bush said, his crazies in the basement of the White House. Those at the time were the neocons. These are the ones whose government policy the United States is running on. Obama is using the same neoconservatives' policies to run the world. And a lot of these people from right, as soon as they dropped the first atomic bomb, said, now we're going to take over the world. We're going to bomb, bomb, bomb until we get everybody we don't want. And they've always been chomping at the bit to get Russia. Now the talk is that they're going to, like all these other fake false flag activities, don't be surprised if you see a small mushroom cloud in Ukraine and the media all of a sudden, the Russians did it. The Russians are blowing a nuclear bomb up in Ukraine. Now the world has to, if we have any responsibility to future generations, we have to stand up to these villains, you know. And then it'll go on day after day after day, just like you mentioned 9/11. And like they have cover-ups that just go on and on and on. Every year there's a new cover-up for this and that. So to answer your question, are they crazy enough to do it? A lot of them are, not all of them. We have to appeal to them that a nuclear war is not an option on the table. And the way we can do that is the Obama White House is really accessible. Everyone in the world, really, because nuclear annihilation is everybody's issue. Everyone in Canada should simply call the White House, or they have email if you're on the internet. Call them and give them 3 words: no nuclear war. That's it. And if we bombarded the switchboard, so to speak, switchboards at the White House, that it's not an option by the world citizens, because the world doesn't want it. But there's enough crazies in the right positions that have always wanted it and are dying to have the opportunity, and they're itching because their war against Russia is kind of falling apart. And that's why it's like they're desperate in the sense that they're so obsessed with taking over the world. So the first thing we need to do, the emergency for 2015, is we have to stop them from thinking that a nuclear war is an option. The other thing that the public needs to do is look at the question of these kinds of psychopathic personalities in power. In the long run, we need to imprison psychopaths. That's really what prisons are really built for. They're built to put the biggest criminals of all in prison. And when people wage wars of aggression, where millions of people are killed, we have to respond. And we don't really have the mechanisms for that. Our government is top down. And so we go up, and then when the government at the very top is committing crimes, who's going to put them in jail? We don't have a mechanism. We have to create that. So what's been happening, the kind of like the seeds of a planet-wide movement is starting. We're starting to see these tribunals, war tribunals, coming up. Now, I've written a list, and I hope your camera crew can show this list in the credits at the end so that people can get out their pencil and paper and write down any one of these or a couple of them, and they can go to the website or look it up on the internet, and it shows you how fantastically well done these tribunals are. These are done by the people, by scientists, people in the know, and the evidence and the fact is highly circumstantial, and it really shows the correctness of the procedures that they use, something that everybody would be proud of. So what should people do then? Well, you can contact them. There'll be a contact number for some of these at least, and say, what can the public do? We ultimately need a policing force, an arresting body to go after these people. Now we're starting to see some shots fired over the bow Cheney, Rumsfeld, some of these, Kissinger, sometimes they cancel talks in other countries because those countries are thinking about arresting them if they come. So you see, we've got the bud, the seed is in the ground and it's starting to sprout roots, but it's going to take a mass movement from around the world. So first we have to light up the switchboard of the White House to stop nuclear war. 2015 is the most dangerous year in history because these people are serious, dead serious about taking control over the planet because they're obsessed with the idea.
You know, if they feel that an international movement, including war tribunals, are coming after them, then maybe behind what they're doing also is fear. And one way of stopping that threat to them is, as they so often do in history, they create a war somewhere else, and while we're all focused on that war, these tribunals and their power disappear because you lose civility, you lose society.
Well, intoxication is something we don't talk about in politics much, but power is so intoxicating, you get way too big for your britches. But when you take someone that is obsessed and can't be stopped because they can't stop themselves, we discovered there's one thing that does work. Ray Ferrito was a mafia hit guy who killed over 200 people. And he thought nothing of it, and he was all full of himself. But finally one day, a contract was put out on him. And you should have seen when the shoe was on the other foot, he almost had a transformation. He said, I could smell the flowers. You know, I could smell fresh air, which was just blasé to me before. Now that my life is shortened now, you know, so it was like shock therapy. But we're not going to get them in that sort of thing. We've got to get them out of power. That's why these tribunals are going to take time. But I'll tell you, if there's a mushroom cloud over Ukraine or say even Turkey, because Turkey now is under the crosshairs of the U.S., because what did they do? Are you familiar with what Turkey just did?
I think Turkey is dealing with Russia in shipping oil and gas into Europe.
That's it.
Through Turkey.
Yes, the U.S. thought they had Russia boxed in.
Yes.
And so Russia finally said, okay, the Southern Stream, we're not doing it because the U.S. is having too much success blocking it going into Europe. Now Turkey has decided, man, there's just too much money to be made renting the pipelines into Europe at a high rate. Erdogan is going to become filthy rich. The country will become filthy rich just piping all that oil right through Turkey. So the U.S. is absolutely livid with Turkey. So a mushroom cloud could come over Turkey, for example, too. But going back to just to kind of finish off this thing about people and these tribunals, if people get behind these tribunals and we start moving a mass movement, tweet this, you know, put it on Facebook that you went to this tribunal and you saw that they've got strong merit. Let's push them. Tweet and Facebook. The same thing with the White House. No nuclear war. And if we tweet it around the world and they get flooded with this, I think Obama will back down. And 2015 is a time where we really have to focus on this.
I mean, it's like as if they really are seriously. Do you really feel that we are in danger of a nuclear war? I mean, it seems so impossibly insane.
Well, as we saw from the picture, if you're willing to do this,
they've done it. They've done it to other people.
You know,
they're doing it right now to other people. What am I talking about? Of course they do it.
A psychopath does not have a conscience. They do not care what happens to the masses. As far as they're concerned, the masses is just a rat fest that they want to eliminate and get rid of. And this is one way you can do it. If you go to Vietnam, those people are still, the Vietnam War never ended for Vietnamese because they're still having jelly babies brought on by Agent Orange. And one CIA agent said, well, if we can't win the war, we'll destroy your land so you won't be able to grow food on it for 200 years. Well, it didn't work out quite that way, but they're having deformed babies. And I saw a picture of a wall in a hospital in Saigon that's full of jars of babies that are deformed with two heads. The most grotesque things you can ever imagine. And these are being born still today in Vietnam because the U.S. people that are sick enough to do this have no boundaries. And that's why they belong in the insane asylum. Instead, the inmates, you know, the crazies are in the White House. Just as Bush said, the crazies in the basement. Now the crazies are out of the basement and on the top floor. Not really funny, is it? Not
no,
really
it's
funny.
not funny. Well, is there, I guess you've answered, is there a grand prize and it's just these people want absolute power?
They want control of every resource on the planet. They want absolute control over every human being.
I'm going to read out a few of these tribunals,
Okay,
and I think you've said people should just Google them and try to get in touch with them.
Yes.
So the International Criminal Tribunal for Afghanistan at Tokyo, the International War Crimes Tribunal, Yugoslavia, Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, the World Tribunal on Iraq, the Bertrand Russell War Tribunal on Vietnam, and the International War Crimes Tribunal, United States War Crimes Against Iraq, also Lawyers Against War, and the Permanent People's Tribunal.
There's others too. But here's the thing, the U.S. is trying to consolidate their power in the world, but there's a jailbreak. Remember that song? There's going to be a jailbreak. And the countries, there's 7 countries now trying to break out right now. France was one of them. Turkey by making this new deal. Hungary has broken loose, so they're going to be punished. But they're trying to make a jailbreak, and so it can happen. But it's not going to happen if we have nuclear annihilation. So we have to let the White House know no nuclear war, period.
Thank you, Beau Filter, and thank you
You're
for
welcome.
watching this segment of Citizens Forum.